Story 1. I was very young, probably 7, 8 years old. My mother had gone to the store and left me alone. This is the early 80s in small-town Mississippi, y'all. It was a different time. It had to be a Saturday morning because I was watching cartoons, and I heard a knock on our front door. We didn't have a window or a peephole, and it's a small-town BFE nowhere, Mississippi. So I opened the door and an elderly man was standing there, bleeding from the head. He was wearing these thick gold Coke bottle glasses, a bright red short-sleeve shirt with a pocket protector, blue jeans, and a belt buckle that had Eddie engraved on it in big letters. He said he was in a car accident down the road and if I could please call the police and fire department since his wife was trapped in the car. I told him to come and sit down on our couch. He did, and I shut the door. I went into the kitchen and called our local police department and told them about the accident. When they asked where the accident happened, I realized I didn't know, so I yelled out to the man, "What road did this happen on?" And I got no answer. I told the police to hold on, walked into the living room, and the man was gone like a fart in the wind. I didn't hear our squeaky-ass door open, so I knew he didn't leave, and there was an imprint on the couch from where he had been sitting. I looked in my bathroom to see if maybe he had gone in there to wash the blood off his head, and he wasn't there. I looked in my bedroom and my mom's bedroom. Nothing. When I came back to the phone, I told the police operator that he was gone, and I didn't know he had left. I gave them my address, and the police and fire department came to my house. I told them about what had happened, what the man had been wearing, everything. The police searched the area and found nothing. They talked to my neighbors who said they didn't hear anything and didn't see anyone matching the man's description. By this time, my mom got back home, and I got in trouble for making a false police call. Months later, when I got off the school bus one afternoon, there were police cars everywhere at my house. A detective was waiting inside with my mom and said he wanted to ask me some questions about the phone call I made about the man asking for help a few months previously. When I told him the story again and gave him the man's description, he just sat there staring at me open-mouthed. He thanked me for my time, told me I wasn't in trouble, and they gave me a police officer teddy bear. They talked to my mom for a bit and left. After they had been gone a few minutes, my mom called me back into the dining room, sat down at the table and told me that the police had found a car that had driven off the road less than a mile from our house and had found 2 bodies inside. One was thought to be male and the other female. The car was completely destroyed and upside down, about 60 yards off the road in a very rural and heavily wooded area, which is why it took them so long to find them. The body thought to be male was wearing the exact same clothes I had described. Both of them were pinned inside the car upside down, and both were still wearing their seat belts. My family and friends treated me really weird for a long time. Story 2. I've told these stories on an account I used to have that I can't for the life of me remember how to log into. When I was an older teenager, everyone in the house had just gone to sleep. It was around midnight, and me and my sister always slept with our bedroom door open. I had a clear view of the kitchen table from my bedroom, since it was the first bedroom leading away from the living room, but all the lights were off and it was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything. As I drifted off to sleep, the clear, unmistakable sound of a kitchen chair sliding loudly across the kitchen floor jolted me awake. I was terrified to look into the kitchen from my bed. My dad got up right away and came down the hall in his tidy whities and turned the lights on to investigate. Think Harry, beer belly, blue collar, redneck. And there was no one in the kitchen. We were all in bed, including the dogs. The sound woke everyone up. All we could really do was go back to sleep and hope the rest of the night was quiet. Another time in the same house, I was going into the kitchen, again close to midnight, to put a glass in the sink. There was a window above the sink that had one of those solid, pull-down blind shades. As I got to the sink, the blind suddenly went flying up and rolled up into itself. I flew out of the kitchen at lightning speed. Once when my boyfriend was leaving to go home when I was around 20 or 21, again around midnight. We tiptoed to the front door in the darkness, and I was telling him bye. And the disc tray and the DVD player in the living room opened and closed a few times by itself. While we both stood there wide-eyed and staring at it, he was like, "Welp, gotta go," and left, and I sprinted back to my room. I'm fully convinced the house has something bad in it, and it always felt very evil. I lived there from the time I was 10 until I was 23. I used to have horrific nightmares about something evil being in the walk-in closet of the master bedroom. In my dreams, it was always a big black shadow mass that was trying to drag me into the closet, and I would be frantically trying to escape it in slow motion. Or it would be hovering near the foot of my bed, slowly inching towards me. The terror I felt in those dreams was always so real, and I couldn't stand to be in or near that closet for more than a few minutes at a time. I always had the overwhelming feeling to run if I was around it for too long. I had to start sleeping with a lamp on when I got to be around 19 because I was always sleeping in a state of fright. And to this day at 31, I'm scared to sleep alone in complete darkness. But the dreams basically stopped when I moved out. Neither of my parents could stand to sleep in the master bedroom for longer than a few months at a time. My dad swears that one night while he was sleeping in there alone, my mom had started sleeping in the living room at that point, he felt the blankets tug on one side of him. So when he rolled over to see what it was, he heard a voice in his ear on the other side whisper, "Liar, liar, liar." He did not spend the rest of the night in there. Years later, my parents gave sleeping in there another try for a few months, and my baby niece was living with us. There was a crib for her at the foot of my parents' bed, and my dad said he woke up and saw the shape of my niece sitting up in her crib in the darkness, and he went to nudge my mom awake to tell her to get the baby. But my mom had already taken my niece into the living room, and neither of them was in the room. My dad basically hightailed it out of there, and the baby-shaped shadow was gone. My brother claims that he had a sleep paralysis episode of something sitting on his chest and strangling him. This was odd to me, because I remember when we first moved into the house, I briefly slept in my brother's room, and I had the most peaceful dream at 10 years old, that I was in a beautiful, sunny, and very green forest. And there was an intense feeling of peace washing over me. And in my dream, I had the understanding that God was with me and that everything was okay. I used to hang out in my brother's room and play video games with him, and not once was I ever spooked or afraid in there. Now only my dad lives in the house. My parents are separated, and he sleeps in the literal diagonal opposite end of the house from the master bedroom closet. He turned the den right by the front door into his bedroom, and his bed was in the farthest corner of the room. He spends all his time at home reading the Bible and making his own ammo. My boyfriend, same one, jokes around every now and then that maybe my dad will give us the house one day, and my response is always, "Heck no, I don't want to live there, it's haunted." Story 3. We were about 13, and my best friend and I lived in the second story of an apartment building with her mom at the time. After playing indoors, we decided to go outside. As soon as we stepped outside, her in front of me, I said, "Oh, it's so cold," and I let the door slightly ajar to grab my coat off the couch. Then turning around, we ran back outside together. I stopped at the door to put on my coat, but she kept running to the end of the balcony where the stairs were that led to an empty parking lot. Trying to be sneaky and scare her, I snuck up behind her as she quietly looked over the railing. When I got about 3 feet away from her, she quickly turned around, smiled, and darted around the corner down the stairs. I laughed and chased after her, only I thought it was odd how quickly she got down the stairs and found a place to hide. The stairs led to an empty parking lot. She was nowhere to be found. Confused, I circled back up to the stairs on the opposite end of the lot. These stairs were the only other way up to the second floor and an apartment complex length down the way. As I made my way across, up and back to her apartment without seeing her, I opened her apartment door at the same time she was walking back out. Immediately I was thinking, "What EF, how?" I said, "How did you get back inside so fast?" She said, "What do you mean I went in right behind you?" "To get my coat too." She went on to explain that she agreed when I said it was cold and went back in with me to grab a coat from her room. I made her swear on everything sacred to her at the moment, and even periodically until this day, besties over 20 years, that it was not her at the top of the stairs that day. Story 4. Apparently, we lived with a benign spirit in our house for 3.5 years. This is my mother's account of what happened because my sister and I didn't see anything at the time. Only my brother, his best friend, and my mother saw it. Back when we were living in South Africa, we had moved into an apartment which we had bought. The moving in was actually quite eventful because a mother and her son had rented the place before, and although they had been notified, they decided to stay past the date that was given to them. I'm not really sure about the details of that as I was around 7 or 8. Long story short, we moved in and started settling. After putting us to bed, my mother decided to stay up and watch TV. My brother was out with his friends. As she's watching whatever show was on at the time, she glances at our only plant in the house, which is about 1.85 meters tall, and sees a man roughly the same height as the plant standing under one of its leaves. Noping out of that shit, she gets up and flicks the lights on. He's not there. Calling it a night, she goes to bed. The next day, or maybe 2 days later, I'm not sure on that detail, at breakfast, my brother, who was around 16 at the time, picked up a piece of bread, turned around to the plant and said, "Hey Michael, want some?" Laughing. My mother asks him who Michael is, and he says Michael's the guy standing under the plant at night. Mind you, my mother didn't say anything to anyone about Michael to not freak us out. My brother's best friend was also over that morning. We had basically unofficially adopted him. And my mother asked him if he saw Michael too, and he said yes. She then asks him to describe Michael, and he gives a perfect description, down to the whites of his eyes. Michael apparently was a black young man around 140-50 mm in height, wearing plain black trousers, a white button-down shirt, and a green vest. His skin tone was quite dark, with a faint sheen to it. His eyes were also dark in color, and the whites were tinted a bit yellow. He had a permanent smiling expression on his face that didn't reach his eyes. He stayed put where he was, never moving, but following you with his eyes. One morning, my mom woke up to my dad coming home, who had bought this indoor circulating water thing. I really don't know what they're called. He moved the plant exactly opposite where it was, next to the couch, and put that water thing there instead. My mother didn't say anything, and that night Michael also moved with the plant. Of course, after hearing this, I asked the next logical question that any sane person would ask. Why the fuck didn't she just throw away the plant? She said it never occurred to her facepalm. So yeah, that is the story of Michael, the benign, smiling spirit that was a part of our family for some time. Story 5. I grew up in a very rural area, mostly crop farms everywhere. About a mile from my parents' house, there was this old abandoned farmhouse that all the area kids said was haunted. They would sneak into the house after dark, all the typical stupid kid crap, but I believe there are things in this world better left alone and never went. Years passed, the house fell into disrepair and was eventually torn down, leaving an old weatherred barn. Well, I make a little side money selling photos of abandoned places, so I wanted to take a picture of the barn. I parked on the road and was walking up the drive. I made it about 10 feet before I just could not walk any further. My feet wouldn't move forward, my adrenaline spiked, and I burst into tears. So I turned back and ran to my car. I didn't feel safe until I got past a nearby creek you have to cross to get there. I let it go, but a few months later we had to drive past the property after having Christmas dinner with my parents, and there was a creature standing in the drive. It reminded me of the faun from Pan's Labyrinth, just super tall with a wide head and horns or antlers, but the eyes were more on the side of the head. Again, adrenaline kicked in and I burst into tears, but I was trying to keep it together because I didn't want to freak out my kids. My husband asked if I was okay. I just said, "You saw that, right?" "Yep." "Was it human?" I asked. "Nope," he answered. I don't know what that thing was, but I refused to drive there again. Story 6. When I was a kid, about 10, 12-ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while my mom was out running errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight, but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair. So naturally, I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backward while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, "Welp, guess I'm about to die," while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt 2 hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed Mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself, and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing, but no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name, and walked the house afterward to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell, where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell. Like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Story 7. I was working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. The building had a single entrance, and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back. So I go patrol the building to find him, and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turned lights on for him. No other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point, I went to check the cameras to see where he went, but he was not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point, I logged it as an incident and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. The next day, my boss called me and said that the worker had been on vacation out of state for several days and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation for what happened. Story 8. This happened years ago when I was a teenager, but I remember wanting to sleep in my guest room really badly for a few nights. I chalked it up to it being a bigger bed and a cooler room, which was nice during the hot summer days. But for 3 straight nights, I would wake up at 3 a.m. to a tap on the window and a super bright light pouring in through the blinds, and each night I said, "No, go away, don't come inside," and then roll over to sleep. After the second night, I told myself to get up and investigate to see what the light was, but on the third night, I woke up with a powerfully intense feeling like I absolutely needed to stay in bed and repeat that phrase again. However, instead of rolling over to go back to sleep, I stayed still to see what would happen. I then saw the lights wave like they understood what I said and were waving goodbye, and then the lights disappeared. Never happened again after that. To this day, I hate myself for not getting up and looking out the window to see what sort of alien thing was tapping at my window. Story 9. I got my driver's license at 22 years old and was a nervous driver. One summer in 2014, my parents were going to our family's beach house with my, at the time, toddler son, and I was going to meet them there the following Saturday morning as I had work. At the time, I was driving a beat-up 2000 Chevy Cavalier with no air conditioning, and my cigarette lighter was broken, so I could not charge my GPS system in the car. I also didn't have a smartphone at the time, so I figured I would charge my GPS overnight, and it would survive the hour-and-a-half drive to my family's beach house. What I didn't take into account, due to being a freshly licensed driver, was that Saturday morning traffic on the NJ Garden State Parkway in the summer is a fucking nightmare. I also have an absolutely awful sense of direction, and I can get a bit anxious when I get lost. I left my house around 8 in the morning and texted my parents that I would be at the beach house around 10 latest, and that I would take the baby to the beach when I got there. By 10:45, I was sitting in the dead stop of traffic, sweating my butt off as there was no breeze. The GPS suggested I take a different exit than I normally would, and I jumped at the chance to get off the parkway. Whatever exit it wanted me to take also brought me to more dead stop traffic. At this point, my GPS was about to die, and I had no idea where I was going. I didn't even have a bottle of water on me. Around 12:30, I was driving through random towns with no idea where I was. Covered in sweat, my GPS had been dead for hours, and I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I called my parents, who had no idea where I was, and they suggested I stop somewhere to ask for directions. But when I did find a fire station, no one was inside. I went back to my car utterly defeated and burst into tears. I didn't know what to do and was half afraid I would never find my way home. I thought of my late uncle, who was a limo driver and the namesake of my son. I was sure he probably knew exactly where I was due to taking teenagers down the shore every year after their proms. I looked up at the ceiling of my car and cried, "Hey, Uncle C, I'm lost and afraid and I have to get to the baby. Where the hell am I?" All of a sudden, I heard the mechanical voice of the GPS say, "At the stop sign, make a right." I looked down at the GPS and saw that it was no longer dead, but it wasn't fully on either. Instead of it showing a map or the main menu, it was just a blank white screen. It repeated to me, "At the stop sign, make a right." I figured I had maybe a minute or so before it died again, so I went to the stop sign and made the right. The GPS directed me for the next half an hour to the front of my family's beach house. As soon as I parked the car, instead of the typical, "You have reached your destination," that the GPS usually said, it just went, "Goodbye," and then died again. I had never heard it say goodbye to me before that day, and I never heard it say that again. My family and I are convinced that my uncle helped me find my way home through the GPS, and yes, I got a smartphone that same year for Christmas, so I would always have access to a GPS LOL. Story 10. My house growing up had a set of stairs. You walked up, then they made a 90-degree turn to the left. That led to our game room. Across the room was the door to my bedroom. My bed was positioned right across from my door, so when I was laying in bed at night, my doorway looked like a black hole if I had my door open. We also had a baby gate at the bottom of the stairs, so my little brother couldn't climb up. Whenever you tried to step over the gate, your foot would tap it because it was pretty tall. I was lying in bed one night, playing on my GBA around 3 a.m. I heard the tap of the baby gate and then someone walking up the stairs. I was expecting my mom to come fuss at me for being awake so late, but nothing. I heard the steps coming up the stairs and then they stopped. I said, "Mom, Dad?" No response. I then tried my other brother's name, not the toddler obviously, but nothing. I just kind of sat there sweating. I then jumped up and turned on my lamp. There was no one in the game room. I had no interest in going downstairs to investigate, so I shut my door and went to sleep. I asked my mom the next morning and she said it wasn't her or my dad. So I went to ask my brother, and that's when I found out he was at a friend's house that night. Never knew what it was and still creeps me out.
The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.